My name is Tom Hollingsworth, and I am an event organizer for Tech Field Day, and we are here at Mobility Field Day Extra at Aruba Atmosphere 2018. We've been coming to Aruba Atmosphere for several years because they're doing some of the greatest things in technology right now. We've seen a lot of really great things from the keynote. We've seen a lot of really awesome technology and demos that didn't fail, so go Aruba. But the idea is that you tune in for Tech Field Day because you want to see the technology. You want to hear the people discuss the technology that's behind a lot of the things that we're hearing, words like NetInsights or smart digital workplace. And that's what we've done, is we've invited 9 of the best and brightest folks in the wireless and mobility space to come here and talk to you for the next hour and 15 minutes about what's going on. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to moderate this panel, because no one wants to listen to me, but I'm going to have the panelists all introduce themselves so that we can get this thing rolling. So JD, why don't you go ahead and kick it off?
Hey guys, Johnathan Davis, I go by JD, at Subnetwork on Twitter and pretty much everywhere else, subnetwork.me. I work for customer in the government, municipal government space.
Samuel Clements, Mobility Practice Manager at a large VAR in the southeast of the states, on Twitter at Samuel_Clements.
Keith Parsons, Keith R. Parsons on Twitter. WLAN Pros is my blog site, and I do Wi-Fi.
Blake Croney, you can find me on Twitter at Blake Croney, and pretty much all the other social accounts is Blake Croney. I do professional services for wireless design. I train and I dabble in a little bit of development work.
I'm Jake Schneider, also known as Jake from State Farm. I work at a VAR out of Boise, Idaho named CompuNet, and you can find me on Twitter at jsnyder81 or at my blog, which is 2dsfromds.com.
Ethan Banks, I'm one of the co-hosts on the Packet Pushers podcast, and you can find me at ECBanks on Twitter and at packetpushers.net.
I'm John Welsh. I'm a solutions architect with a large reseller, and you can find me online at Sample5.
I'm Amy Arnold. I'm a network engineer in the public sector. I am at Amy Engineer.
Hi, I'm Richard McIntosh. I'm at 802TopHat. 802tophat.wordpress.com is the blog, and I work for a nonprofit in the East Coast.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us. We really do appreciate it. So let's go ahead and get the first topic kicked off. So we saw a lot of really great stuff today in the technology keynote from Partha and his, Alpine Organic Solutions, was that it?
Foods,
thank you. One of the things that really kind of captured our attention was NetInsights. Now, we got a sneak peek at some of the technology that NetInsights is built off of through the Raza acquisition. And it looks like they've kind of beefed it up a little bit. And that's one of the things, we keep hearing about how big data is driving the way the technology is working, and analytics are king now. Data is the new oil. Pick your euphemism here. But I want to hear how a group of mobility-focused experts, wireless people, look at the analytics capabilities that they can get from NetInsights and how they're going to build on it and what they're going to do with it. So who wants to start this off?
I'll start off.
Go for it, Keith.
NetInsights, a big data play for sure. What it does is, for those of you who don't know how it works, there's a collector that talks to your controller, and the controller dumps data at a very fast pace about every client, about every AP. We know about the transactions that are taking place, both as they're just even probing or after they're connected, the data rates, the flows, SNRs, the entire piece. All of that data is collected back on site and then shifted off to a data center. In that data center, they have the ability to slice and dice a huge amount of data that's coming in. And because of that, you can get insights, thus the name Insight, into your network. Some things you couldn't get any other way. Like you can triangulate on every single client, not because you have any location system built into your network. You just have every device that can hear a probe request on the controller reports that, and then triangulation takes place. So literally in a day, tens of millions of vector math is taking place to figure out where all the clients are. And with this data, you can then take and plot where your clients are, when they're attached to an indoor AP, when they're attached to an outdoor AP. But when you have millions, and currently they're running 3.5 million or so pieces of data on different clients, there's a lot of data that you can pull up. So not only can you see where the devices are they on the right AP? Are they making the right decisions along the way? We're kind of blind. We sit back when we're playing with our Wi-Fi and we say, well, if I make this change, then I'm going to see if this happens. If I change my MBR from 12 to 24, what happens to my retry rate? And maybe I can get around it. Whereas if you have all your clients and you know exactly what happened when you did something, that can really help you move along further. So last year we heard from them and saw the process and how it was working. This year we kind of saw what they were doing as the end result. One of the things we saw in today's technical keynote was tracking from a green status if we can take an AP and if no one's using it, or we don't need the extra capacity of extra APs, and turn them off live. And they've been running it here, kind of a risky move, but I applaud them for trying it, that they were actually turning off APs in this room. As we leave, APs will shut down if they're not needed. And that's data that we don't have yet, so it's a pretty cool way of doing it. So it's kind of a way to get lots and lots of data and look at it different ways.
Awesome. Who else has some thoughts on this?
I'll follow along or follow on that. I think it's the statement, oftentimes you don't know what you don't know. And I think what's really interesting is when you bring all that data together, you begin seeing patterns and you begin getting, as it's called, insights that you may not even realize that you were looking for. And based on that data and the correlation that you're allowed to do with that, you can really start asking questions about your network and begin performing actions based on those questions that you never thought you would, that you never expected to ask. I kind of noticed this with all of the big data plays and all of the analytics plays. Even the developers often begin talking, when they discuss it, they say, we didn't realize what we would learn when we did this. We fed it a whole lot of data. We kind of taught it how to analyze it a little bit, and then we kind of looked at results, and we were looking, to see what results it gave us, and often even they are surprised by that. So that's one of the things.
Who was the one he mentioned something today that he thought this was going to fail and then realized that wasn't it at all?
Yeah, that's a perfect example. That was one of them was the number of clients that would or would not support DFS channels, right? So there was a I believe all of us kind of have this idea that there are a whole lot of clients, especially on a big university campus, something along those lines, that would not support DFS channels. But what they actually found was when they isolated 5 gigahertz capable clients, right, because there were a few that were 2.4 only, but as soon as they isolated those 5 gigahertz only clients, was it
97, 98%?
Yeah, it was a very high percentage that were capable of supporting DFS channels,
including supporting the weather channels.
Right, and that kind of changes that begins now that makes you comfortable. If you're looking at that data, suddenly you go, well, in my environment at least, it makes sense for me to have these on. Like I'm okay dealing with the occasional false positive on DFS. I'm okay with dealing with those few clients, those very few clients, that 2 to 3% that can't support them, because I'm going to have secondary coverage. So it's that type of information that even the developers sometimes don't know.
Jake, what are your thoughts on this?
I really liked what we saw today. I still think this is very early, and this is a platform for looking at things that we do and the data that we can collect out of a wireless system. And while that's really cool, I think we have to ask the questions of what do we care about, what do we want to see, because that product team is building they're using this to answer questions. And I think we have to ask the right questions. I look at a lot of the stuff and it's like, well, I could go do that. It's like I could go, and we sit in the keynote and the guy's like, well, yeah, we changed some channels and power around and it solved our problem. And I was like, a wireless engineer could have done that. We just have to teach, we had to teach the platform how to know to go do those things. And while I originally was like, it's not very impressive. And it's like, well, it is, because they taught this thing to do what I would do. And long term, that's really powerful because I can't be everywhere.
So I want to come back to one of your thoughts, but I want Sam to be able to get his thoughts in here.
Yeah, I think there was another great example of a popular gaming console that universities were concerned if they trimmed out low data rates was going to suffer some incompatibilities. And I think it goes back to what JD was saying. A lot of times you don't know the questions you're asking until you get to a point where you realize once you have those insights and you can say, hey, I've done this comparison with another university and they have this and they're supporting this brand of consoles, using these OUIs spread across this period of time, and 90% of these devices can connect. And when you overlay that data on top of your university, then this percentage breaks out of these OUIs that you have present on your device on your campus. And, this may impact 3 or 5 devices on your campus. Knowing that you can take a step back from the FUD sometimes of, hey, I can't do this because something over here says that things might break. Being able to wrap your hands around actual data that says, yeah, you know what, this may actually break 1 or 2 things on your campus, but you are sacrificing 30% channel utilization across your environment for these 4 devices. It's insight into what that give and take looks like.
So the fact that you guys you're talking about asking the right questions, that's something I actually want to bring up. One of the things that we're starting to see from big data platforms, from analytics and the whole AI, ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning curve is not necessarily that we're reinforcing the data that we already have. Because a lot of people look at NetInsights and they might think to themselves, oh, well, this is just proving my point that I built this network right from the ground up.
That's what I thought.
But what they're doing is, it's the Pop-Tart problem. When Walmart did analytics against their sales database and they found out that, strangely enough, people like to buy Pop-Tarts before hurricanes. It's freakishly crazy how that correlation works. That's not something they would have ever found without a data platform. Do you have any opinions about whether or not a tool like NetInsights will allow you to discover those gems, those diamonds in the rough that you would not have known about if you didn't have that capability? And Blake is throwing his hand right in the sky, so give it to me, Blake.
Well, a fan of Pop-Tarts, but I don't live in a hurricane-prone area, so that's not why I buy Pop-Tarts.
Blizzards.
Because I'm too cheap to buy anything else. No. Is it the fact that we have all of this data and now we have the ability to do correlation on large numbers of data sets and then find a justification for something going on it, and that's not really purposeful or meaningful? I mean, looking at it from, is there truly any reason why there's that surge of Pop-Tarts before the hurricane, or is it just because hurricanes fall after everybody does all the grocery shopping for the week or the month or whatever the case might be? And I think the big data, the thing that I'm worried about is that we're going to get to the point where we have too much data that is leading ourselves down and painting a story that we shouldn't be trying to look at and see.
As in you'll see lots of correlations, but not really have any causation.
No, you're gonna see all this data, and something's gonna process all this data faster than our human minds can process it. So it's gonna put these things together, and it's gonna put these pretty graphs together that show something happened, but then we're stuck trying to figure out how do we relate this to something that is actually physically going on, and is it even worthwhile to do that, Adam? Is there any value in it?
Okay, so let's dig into this just a little bit. Think about the very first predictive site survey models. Yeah, Jake's probably sitting there going, oh God, not again.
Are we talking the red solo cup models, or?
No, like actual real math. But think about how bad those things were until we gave the system enough data to be able to build a predictive algorithm. It isn't perfect, but it's better than it was. And the more data you throw at that problem, the better it gets.
To an extent.
To an extent. But are you trying to say that you think that by throwing too much data at this problem, even with a great tool like NetInsights, you're not going to be able to get stuff out of it, or you're worried what you're going to find?
I think there's a combination of both, because I think it depends on the data scientists. I think that we need to make sure that the people that are doing the interpretation of the data and giving us the graphs or giving us the reports have to come from our industry. And I don't know about many of you, but I'm not, well, Keith's a data guy, but I'm not a data junkie guy to that extent. So we see that problem where they're really good at putting numbers together and they're really good at coming up with algorithms to be able to do all the plots and the charts and everything, but they don't understand what it is that we do. That's where we need to help train them and understand these are the items that do matter and these are the items that don't matter, so they don't get hung up on the wrong side of it.
Sam's got something.
Well, and you know, going with what you're saying, you know, along with great power comes great responsibility, right? What you do with that information, we in our industry have a tendency to look at any given environment and go, well, that's wrong. Whoever did that's an idiot. Well, that's wrong. They're a moron. And there's this.
Were you pointing at Rob for a reason?
No, I was pointing at his feet.
Okay.
So there's a tendency to be reactive and almost shift blame, you know, to the other guy.
Right.
And when you start rolling through these, you know, these self-healing conversations about I'm getting data back, and if I make this decision over here, I'm going to tweak this, I'm going to get 5% more performance out of my network. There's some risk involved in that, especially when you talk about overhauling legacy networks or transition networks, or who built what and who put what where. And I guess my concern is that, yeah, if we go down that road, as we start tweaking and tuning, we may lose out on some of that tribal knowledge about why networks existed the way they did. And I just think it's one of those risks that is just inevitable with the evolution of the tools.
And I think that risk can be mitigated somewhat in the short term, but I'm sure in the long term, NetInsight and AirMatch are going to get to a point where you want it to be as automated as possible. Today, there's still a human in the loop where the insight says, this is what we saw, and then some humans got to go do the little tweaky bit.
But do we want that final stage of automation or not?
I don't know if we want it, because that's what we do. But I'm sure the industry is out there saying, how can we make this as automated as possible?
I can still remember the conversations about automating the big red button to kill all the network traffic to shut down malware, and how that may have not been a good idea. Ethan, you haven't spoken up here yet, and you are the co-host of a podcast called Data Knots.
Yes.
So what do you think?
So Blake, going back to something that you were saying, you know, what data and correlations are going to be found, and are we going to care? One thought there is, what things that are found are actionable? What can we actually do with that data? Oh, you found that correlation. Interesting, not useful. So I think the actionable thing is a big deal, where we're not at a point in machine learning, going back to the context of this conversation, where the algorithms don't have any context for these numbers. We train them with data sets. The better the data sets are, the better we get out of them. But without that deep understanding of what the numbers are, we are getting interesting graphs. We aren't necessarily getting actionable items, things that we can do something with. Another piece of this is there's several different systems like this that I've seen, NetInsights, and then several other vendors are in this space where they're using machine learning to interpret data and try to give you deeper insights into what's actually happening on your network. So it's more than just the RRD tool graphs that we've been looking at for so many years. But again, the context is coming from people. So at the moment, we're in that phase of, okay, we've got products that are on the market that have machine learning involved with them, but they aren't fixing anything yet. It's almost like we're at a teaser stage where we kind of see that this is going to be helpful at some point. But the human knowledge that's required to make use of those, what the algorithmic discoveries are, is very, very much key, and doesn't seem like it's going to change anytime soon. Machine learning is developing slowly.
JD?
So I think maybe there seems to be two areas that come out of this type of data. You know, there's the things that float to the top very quickly and very fast, and they're the things that just immediately become evident. And then there's those things that you have to dig for. And I think when you have to start digging into the data, that's when you have to become very careful. Going back to actually another thing that we discussed this week, the Cape Networks acquisition, that's a perfect platform for something that floats problems to the top very quickly. I'm a huge fan of them. I tried them in my network, and I mean, it's fastest ROI I've ever had on a platform, because I connected a whole bunch of them up. We had, someone started complaining about wireless, and I was like, well, let me log in and see what it says, and bam, okay, DHCP is taking way too long. I didn't go out and do a packet capture. I didn't do anything other than log into the platform and see what what this test client was seeing. And that's the type of data that floats up very fast to the top, rather than the data that you have to go digging for and trying to create correlation. And I think there's two different things that come out of this.
The problems with analytics, though, is always making it consumable by the average everyday network admin. We're looking at these incredibly complex problems and a lot of ifs and thens and what about this and that and the other. A, getting it to a point where you can understand it, but B, getting it to a point where your recommendations aren't dumb is a problem, because what fixes a problem in one environment may cause the problem to cascade out of control in a different environment. So there's, not only is there the whole comprehension of it all, you almost need a data scientist or an analyst to just go look at the dashboards. What comes out of it may or may not be good.
But isn't that one of the reasons why we're building these massive data sets, is to prevent the Stack Overflow problem of just find whatever's there and copy and paste it into the controller and hope it works?
Hopefully.
Well, I think part of it is that there's no accounting in a lot of the data for style. Mm-hmm. So I have coworkers, the way they design networks is different than the way I do. They have specific reasons for the compromises we make. I mean, we have to make a compromise every time we make a design decision. Do I do X or Y? And it's like, well, Y does this better and X does this better. So for my goals, my intentions of what I want, I'm going to make a conscious effort. And the problem is it's not that doesn't work and his way doesn't work or my way doesn't work. It's just they achieve things differently. And when you start getting into looking at the data, I worry that we're going to lose the intention of the things that we wanted to do and why we did the things in order to make the graph, some graph, not necessarily the right graph, but make that graph go the way we want it to.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of context that I don't know that we get. The other piece is, what am I, that decision of what compromise am I making? What am I giving up? And so it's yes, the graph today of these 11 devices are the ones you have, but being able to go in and say, well, if you make this change, here's the model of what your network will now look like. I think when we start getting there, we can start making decisions about, is that the compromise I'm willing to make?
Well, we used to have idiots painting the map green, and now we've got idiots driving the chart as high as it'll go. Right? There's no context, no style, and you're just trading one problem for another.
Ethan, you're vigorously shaking your head, and I want you to at least weigh in before we go to Amy.
There's another weird point here to make, which is we're all infrastructure people, and we think in terms of infrastructure and delivering whatever the packets are across that infrastructure. But I talked to a company a couple of months ago. I forgot the name of it because I talked to too many companies, but their whole thing in life was monitoring the performance of an application at an application level, more of a developer-oriented level. The amount of metrics and telemetry they were pulling off the servers to talk about all the different processes that make up a transaction, all the different calls that make up a transaction from their perspective, happens way above the infrastructure stack. And so I asked him, I said, wait a minute, so when processes are delayed and can kind of identify what's going wrong in an application architecture, but you're not considering infrastructure at all? And they're like, no one's really asking about that yet. We might do that in a version 2 kind of thing. And so that's an illustration of the complexity that we're getting into, and we begin to correlate all the different data points that go into application delivery, and it's just mind-numbing. We're down here at the infrastructure level using machine learning to try to get a handle on it, and yet at this whole higher level that most of us aren't even thinking about at this point as infrastructure people that complicate things, it squares the complexity. It's enormous.
Amy.
Well, I was going to talk about Jake's point about the intention. Well, I think these statistics can be used to show you when potentially the intention is what you wanted to accomplish isn't being accomplished anymore. And sometimes you can't see that in a live environment. You deployed it and the goals have changed or the clients have changed and you don't know it yet, either from departments or from people. And these analytics, but to Ethan's point, you've got to be able to figure out which data you need. It's too much data. You have to whittle it down.
Yeah, maybe. Does anybody in the audience have any questions about NetInsights?
Did you guys see anything new that you hadn't seen as a seasoned professional?
Yeah, I think the application of NetInsight from last year to this year is that they added location. And not location like you'd think RTLS. I don't know exactly where any one MAC address is at one point in time. But I know through 40 or 50 APs that see that MAC address do its probing over a full day period. I can track where it's been. That addition adds a whole new layer of viewing the world. And you can come back and say, I see there's a whole bunch of problems in my network, but what are the problems here? And you can now use location to reverse query the same big database and go, what's going on in this area, and look back into that data that says, oh, in this area, it's an RF issue. Inside of a classroom, it's a DHCP issue. And so instead of just looking at the entire network as a whole, we can now zoom in closer and look at indoor versus outdoor, to the left side, to the right side, things that are moving, things that are static. And so just that one extra metric to track allows us to see a lot of things we didn't, even just last year, we couldn't see.
The one example we had was a customer had budget for X number of new APs. And so their question was, okay, great, we know we have, a large campus that is certainly not perfect from an outdoor perspective. We have all these APs, what areas should we go focus on? And how do you even tackle that problem? Is it polls for students? Is it wandering around the campus going, oh, I think we need more coverage over here or over here? And they were able to demonstrate a campus view using the big data sets that they have. And they were able to demonstrate where large traffic patterns were, and then overlay poor SNR and poor RF performance in hotspot areas that gave the campus basically a hit list. Hey, you've got a patch here, a patch here, a patch here, a patch here. Go focus on those areas.
Even down to how many APs is it needed to fix? Yeah, recommended that based on the average of the whole area, this area in square meters means you need 4 more APs.
And I think that's the recommendation, though, that we need to be cautious about. I think getting those high-level trending of, hey, you've got a quad area over on the northeast corner of your campus that doesn't have good RF. But by the way, what you didn't know is that there's 90% of your patrons roll through this area. You didn't realize that they're all trying to connect to your Wi-Fi network and they're all having really awful performance. I think making the leap to, and you need 5 APs to cover it is maybe a bit of a stretch. I think using that data as a hit list for saying, I'm going to go into this area and I know I'm going to budget about this many APs, then I'm going to go do a proper RF design to make sure I meet my application requirements.
Which is exactly the way we live now, when sales guys go, I just need a quick bomb for that building. And it's just as rough, and we know you still have to engineer a proper answer.
True, absolutely. Yeah. But being able to go back and say, okay, you've got X number of dollars for X number of APs, where are your problems at in your campus? That's insight that I don't know that I've ever seen before. Not backed with empirical data.
All right.
Hi, just stepping back to NetInsight as a whole, how do you feel about the data security and privacy in it? And is there any need for data obscuring data within it that we send up to it? And I noticed you nudging.
And I believe we just set the record. It only took us 30 minutes to get to the data security question.
Before you ask, my boss is working with Aruba to talk about how we can obscure our data going up into NetInsight. But I want to get some feedback for how people feel about it.
What data of it is PII?
It's believe it or not, the login IDs, the student IDs.
Okay, so in your case, you're concerned about the student ID being associated with that going up into there, which certainly is important to make sure that you don't have that being leaked around. Though I have some concerns with the profiles, the risk profiles that are created through the systems that Aruba's been purchasing and kind of where they're going at it. I certainly think that there's some concern on that. From my standpoint, I go way back into the EDU space back in 99 and 2000 when I was in college and working in the EDUs. One of the things that it always was is that, okay, a student ID, it's the first 4 of the student's last name and then a random number. It's not hard to get it. We had open telnet systems that we could hit into it. I certainly respect and understand where you come from, but for me, I don't necessarily consider a lot of that PII. I'm glad you didn't come back and say that you're being told a MAC address is PII like they are over in, what is it, the GDPR stuff?
GDPR, believe it or not.
Yeah, so I see where you're coming from on that one, and I think part of it is that a lot of the stuff, it depends on, where we go from in terms of our logins, if you're supporting ED-ROAM, if you're looking at pass point technologies of trying to have some randomness to the login information. It's a huge concern, yes. looking at it though is, are there many other ways of getting the exact same data off of your network today?
Well, and the radius request goes out in plain text.
This
I mean,
guy's
the payload's encrypted, but your username goes over in plain text. So I can sit on your campus with a packet capture and collect all that information as well.
does.
So, and I do. So,
Stop scaring us, Jake.
sorry.
Well, one of the things that makes it a little unusual for our campus as well is they allow the students to pick their username. So they could use, their full name, they could use some contraction or some variation on a theme. This goes back to long before I was there, so.
That's really interesting. Yeah, kind of scary too. Maturity level much? Okay.
You are a brave, brave man.
Well, and which is an interesting example of the tribal knowledge of fixing problems. Right, the resolution there is probably, amongst other things, to not let students randomly pick their own names. There's probably some heritage there that was the genesis of why that occurred, and who knows what that is. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But in 5-10 years, that's going to be lost to the ages, and then you're going to have some analytics engine come up and say, "Hey, you're doing this stupid thing over here. You need to fix this." Right, and so it's this cyclical cruft, if you will, of your networks that are designed for whatever reason in whatever way that maybe doesn't work tomorrow.